Store owner throws out homeless girl. Moments later, he learns who she really is. The biting wind whipped down Woodward Avenue, swirling snowflakes and rattling the windows of Dawson's Daily, a small convenience store on the edge of downtown Detroit. Inside, Mr. Arthur Dawson, a stout man with a perpetually furrowed brow and a thinning gray mustache, was counting down the minutes until closing time. It was a slow night, the kind of night where the cold kept most people indoors, huddled around their heaters, far from the desolate streets. Mr. Dawson wasn't a cruel man, but he was a practical one. He'd run his store for 30 years, seen the city change, seen businesses come and go, seen the rise in homelessness and the desperation that came with it. He'd learned to be wary, to be cautious, to protect his livelihood. He'd been robbed twice, once at gunpoint, and he'd developed a hard shell, a gruff exterior that kept most people at arm's length. He wasn't fond of the homeless people who often loitered near his store, asking for handouts, scaring away customers. He saw them as a nuisance, a problem, a drain on the city's resources. He'd become jaded, cynical, his empathy eroded by years of dealing with the harsh realities of urban life. The bell above the door jingled, announcing a new customer. Mr. Dawson looked up, his expression already hardening, expecting to see another panhandler. It was a girl, a teenager, no older than 14. She was small and thin, her clothes ragged and inadequate for the brutal Michigan winter. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and shadowed, her dark hair matted and tangled. She looked lost, frightened, and utterly defeated. Lily, for that was her name, hesitated just inside the doorway, her gaze darting around the store, taking in the rows of brightly lit shelves, the colorful displays of snacks and drinks, the warm, inviting air. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, and the smell of hot coffee and microwave burritos was almost overwhelming. She approached the counter slowly, her hands clutching a crumpled dollar bill, her eyes fixed on Mr. Dawson's face. She was used to being ignored, to being treated with disdain, to being invisible. But she had to try. Her mother was sick, and she was desperate. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Could you spare some food? Anything, for my mother." Mr. Dawson's expression didn't soften. He looked at the girl, at her dirty clothes, at her pleading eyes, and he felt a familiar wave of annoyance. He'd heard this story before, countless times. He didn't believe her. He assumed she was lying, that she was just another freeloader looking for a handout. "Get out," he said, his voice harsh and dismissive. "I don't give handouts. Go on, get out of here before I call the cops." Lily flinched, her eyes welling up with tears. She opened her mouth to speak, to plead, but the words wouldn't come. She was too tired, too hungry, too defeated. She turned and shuffled towards the door, her shoulders slumping, her head bowed. She had failed. She had failed her mother. Mr. Dawson watched her go, feeling a flicker of something, guilt, shame, but he quickly dismissed it. He'd done the right thing. He couldn't afford to be soft. He had a business to run. He went back to counting down the minutes, eager to close up shop, to go home, to forget about the girl and her desperate plea. He had no idea that his life was about to change, that his heart, hardened by years of cynicism, was about to be cracked open. Mr. Dawson locked the door, flipped the sign to closed, and began his nightly routine of counting the cash register, restocking shelves, and cleaning the store. He tried to focus on his tasks, to push the image of the girl's face out of his mind, but it lingered, a persistent reminder of his own harshness. He glanced out the window, half expecting to see the girl gone, vanished into the night. But she wasn't gone. She was standing across the street, huddled in a dark alleyway, her small frame silhouetted against the faint glow of a distant street light. Mr. Dawson frowned, his curiosity piqued. Why hadn't she left? Where was she going? He watched her for a few minutes, his initial annoyance giving way to a grudging concern. He saw her pacing back and forth, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if trying to ward off the cold. Then, he saw something that made his heart clench. The girl disappeared into the deeper shadows of the alley, and he could hear muffled voices, a soft cry. He realized that she wasn't alone. He grabbed his coat, a sudden impulse overcoming his usual caution. He had to see what was going on. He had to know if the girl was okay. He stepped outside, locking the door behind him, and crossed the street, the cold wind stinging his face. As he approached the alley, he could hear the girl's voice, pleading, desperate. "Mama, please, just a little bit more. I'll get you something. I promise." Mr. Dawson peered into the darkness, his eyes slowly adjusting to the gloom. He saw the girl kneeling beside a figure huddled on the ground, wrapped in a tattered blanket. It was a woman, her face gaunt and pale, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and ragged. The girl was stroking the woman's hair, whispering words of comfort, her face streaked with tears. It was a scene of utter despair, of heartbreaking poverty, of a child desperately trying to care for her dying mother. Mr. Dawson felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had been so quick to judge, so quick to dismiss, so quick to assume the worst. He had seen a freeloader, a nuisance, instead of seeing a child in need, a daughter desperate to help her mother. He realized the terrible mistake he had made. The girl hadn't been asking for food for herself. She had been asking for food for her mother, a woman who was clearly ill, possibly dying. He stood there for a moment, frozen, his mind reeling. He had been so focused on protecting his own interests, on enforcing his own rules, that he had completely ignored the basic human need in front of him. He had been blind to the suffering, deaf to the pleas. And now, he was faced with the consequences of his own callousness. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had to do something. He had to make amends. He had to help. The transformation in Mr. Dawson wasn't instantaneous, a sudden epiphany that erased years of cynicism. It was a gradual shift, a slow thawing of a heart that had grown cold and hard. The image of the girl and her mother, huddled in the alley, played over and over in his mind, a stark contrast to his own comfortable life. He thought about his own daughter, Sarah, who was grown and living far away. He hadn't always been the best father, often prioritizing work over family, but he loved her deeply. He couldn't imagine her being in Lily's situation, alone and desperate, with no one to turn to. He thought about his own life, his own struggles. He'd worked hard to build his business, to achieve a measure of success. But what was the point of it all, if he couldn't show compassion to those in need? What was the value of his success, if he couldn't use it to help others? He wrestled with his conscience, with his ingrained prejudices, with his fear of being taken advantage of. He knew that helping Lily and her mother could be messy, complicated, and potentially costly. He could get drawn into their problems, become entangled in their lives. But he also knew that he couldn't just walk away. He couldn't ignore the suffering he had witnessed. He couldn't live with himself if he did nothing. He remembered a quote he'd read once, something about the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. He didn't consider himself a particularly good man, but he knew he couldn't be one of the ones who did nothing. He made his decision. He would help them. He would offer them food, shelter, and whatever assistance he could. He would do it, not because he expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew he would face challenges, doubts, and possibly even ridicule. But he was determined to see it through. He walked back towards the alley, his footsteps purposeful, his heart filled with a newfound sense of resolve. He would face whatever came his way, with compassion, with empathy, and with a determination to make amends for his earlier harshness. He had a second chance, a chance to redeem himself, a chance to show that even a cynical old store owner could have a change of heart. Part 4. The Invitation and Initial Aid. Mr. Dawson approached Daly cautiously, his voice soft and tentative. "Excuse me," he said. "Miss Lily, is it?" Lily looked up, startled, her eyes wide with fear. She instinctively moved closer to her mother, as if to protect her. "It's okay, Mr. Dawson said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you. I own the store across the street. I saw you. I saw your mother." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I was wrong," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I was wrong to turn you away. I want to help." Lily stared at him, her expression a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. She had been treated with cruelty and indifference for so long, she couldn't quite comprehend this sudden change of heart. "I have food, Mr. Dawson continued. "Hot food. And drinks. And blankets. It's cold out here. You and your mother, you can come inside. You can warm up. He saw a flicker of hope in Lily's eyes, but she still hesitated. She looked at her mother, who was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and labored. My mother, she's very sick, Lily said, her voice trembling. Mr. Dawson knelt down beside the woman, his heart aching at the sight of her frail, emaciated body. He felt her forehead. It was burning with fever. She needs a doctor, he said. I'll call an ambulance. Lily shook her head frantically. No, she said. No doctors. No hospitals. They'll take her away. They'll separate us. Mr. Dawson understood her fear. He knew that the system often failed the most vulnerable, that families were often torn apart by bureaucracy and red tape. Okay, he said. No doctors, not yet. But you need to come inside. You need to get warm. You need to eat. I promise, I won't let anyone hurt you. He extended his hand to Lily, a gesture of trust, of compassion. She looked at his hand, then at his face, searching for any sign of deception. Finally, she nodded, her eyes filled with tears. She reached out and took his hand, her small, cold fingers gripping his tightly. Mr. Dawson helped Lily to her feet, then gently helped her to lift her mother. Together, they carried the woman across the street and into the store. The warmth of the store enveloped them, a welcome contrast to the biting cold outside. Mr. Dawson led them to a small back room, an office area with a couple of chairs and a small space heater. He helped Lily settle her mother onto a makeshift bed of blankets, then turned up the heat. He went back into the main store and gathered some supplies: a bowl of hot soup, some bread, some bottled water, a first aid kit, and some clean towels. He returned to the back room, his arms laden with provisions. Lily was sitting beside her mother, holding her hand, whispering words of comfort. She looked up as Mr. Dawson entered, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Thank you for helping us. Mr. Dawson felt a lump in his throat. He had never felt so much gratitude for such a simple act of kindness. He set the food and supplies down on a table, then knelt beside Lily's mother, examining her gently. She was clearly very ill, dehydrated, malnourished, and possibly suffering from pneumonia. We need to get her to a doctor, Lily, he said. I know you're scared, but it's the only way to help her. Lily hesitated, her fear battling with her desire to help her mother. Finally, she nodded, her eyes filled with tears. Okay, she whispered. But please, stay with us. Don't leave us. Mr. Dawson promised her that he would. He would stay with them, every step of the way. He would make sure that they were safe, that they were cared for, that they were not separated. He had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But he was determined to make amends. He was determined to help this girl and her mother, to give them a chance at a better life. He was determined to show them that there was still kindness and compassion in the world. Mr. Dawson, realizing the severity of the mother's condition and understanding Lily's fear of separation, knew he needed to tread carefully. He couldn't simply call 911 and risk them being separated by a system that often lacked nuance and compassion. He needed to find someone he could trust, someone who would understand the complexities of the situation. He remembered a customer, Officer Patricia Ramirez, a police officer who frequented his store for coffee and who had always struck him as genuinely kind and empathetic. She wasn't just a cop. She seemed to genuinely care about the community. He found her card tucked away in his wallet as she'd given it to him after a minor incident at the store a few months back, telling him to call her directly if he ever needed anything. He hesitated for a moment, then dialed the number, his hand trembling slightly. Officer Ramirez answered on the second ring, her voice alert and professional. Officer Ramirez, this is Arthur Dawson, from Dawson's Daily on Woodward, he said, his voice slightly hoarse. I need your help. It's complicated. He quickly explained the situation, describing Lily and her mother, their condition, and Lily's fear of being separated. He emphasized the mother's urgent need for medical attention, but also Lily's vulnerability and her history of hardship. Officer Ramirez listened patiently, asking clarifying questions, her tone calm and reassuring. Mr. Dawson, you did the right thing by calling, she said. I'm on my way. I'll bring a social worker with me, someone who specializes in these kinds of situations. We'll figure this out. Just stay put and keep them safe." Mr. Dawson felt a wave of relief wash over him. He trusted Officer Ramirez. He felt that she understood the urgency and the sensitivity of the situation. While they waited, Mr. Dawson did his best to make Lily and her mother comfortable. He offered them more food and drinks, and he found some clean clothes for Lily. He tried to engage Lily in conversation, distracting her from her worries, but she remained quiet and withdrawn, her eyes fixed on her mother. The wait felt like an eternity, but finally, after about 30 minutes, Officer Ramirez arrived, accompanied by a woman named Susan Miller, a social worker with the Detroit Department of Health and Human Services. Officer Ramirez introduced herself and Susan to Lily and her mother. Susan, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, immediately focused on Lily, kneeling beside her and speaking in a soft, reassuring voice. "Hi, Lily," Susan said. "My name is Susan. I'm here to help you and your mom. Can you tell me your mom's name?" Lily hesitated, then whispered, "Eleanor." Susan gently examined Eleanor, checking her pulse, her breathing, her temperature. She confirmed what Mr. Dawson already knew: Eleanor was seriously ill and needed immediate medical attention. Officer Ramirez, meanwhile, spoke with Mr. Dawson, asking him about the events of the evening, about his observations of Lily and her mother, about his decision to help them. Mr. Dawson recounted the story, his voice filled with emotion, his initial prejudice now replaced with a deep sense of compassion. "I was wrong about them, officer," he said, his voice choked with shame. "I judged them too quickly. I didn't see their suffering. I just saw another problem." Officer Ramirez nodded, her expression understanding. "It happens, Mr. Dawson," she said. "We all make mistakes. But you did the right thing. You helped them. And that's what matters." Susan, having finished her assessment of Eleanor, turned to Officer Ramirez. "She needs to go to the hospital, Patricia," she said. "She's severely dehydrated and malnourished, and I suspect she has pneumonia. We need to get her there now." Officer Ramirez nodded. "I'll call for an ambulance." Lily, hearing the word ambulance, panicked. She grabbed Susan's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "No," she cried. "They'll take her away. They'll separate us." Susan gently stroked Lily's hair, trying to calm her down. "It's okay, Lily," she said. "We won't let that happen. I promise. We'll make sure you stay together. But your mom needs help, sweetheart. She needs to see a doctor." It took some convincing, but Lily, seeing the genuine concern in Susan's eyes and trusting Mr. Dawson's reassuring presence, finally relented. She agreed to let the ambulance take her mother to the hospital, but only on the condition that she could go with her. The paramedics arrived, and Eleanor was carefully lifted onto a stretcher and taken to the ambulance. Lily, clutching her worn rabbit Hoppy, climbed in beside her, her small hand gripping her mother's. Officer Ramirez turned to Mr. Dawson. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson," she said. "You did a good thing tonight. We'll keep you informed." Susan handed Mr. Dawson her card. "Call me if you need anything, Mr. Dawson," she said. "And thank you. You've made a real difference." Mr. Dawson watched as the ambulance drove away, its sirens wailing, its lights flashing. He felt a mixture of relief, anxiety, and a profound sense of sadness. He had done what he could, but he knew that Lily and her mother faced a long and difficult road ahead. He closed up his store, his usual routine disrupted, his mind racing. He went home, but he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Lily, about her mother, about the desperation he had witnessed. He had been so close to ignoring them, to letting them suffer in the cold. He had been so blinded by his own prejudices, by his own fears, that he had almost failed to see their humanity. He realized that he had been given a second chance, a chance to redeem himself, a chance to make a difference. And he was determined to make the most of it. He would not abandon Lily and her mother. He would do whatever he could to help them, to support them, to ensure that they had a chance at a better life. The following day, Mr. Dawson visited the hospital, eager to check on Eleanor and Lily. He found them in a small, private room, Eleanor asleep in the bed, hooked up to various machines, and Lily sitting beside her, holding her hand. Lily looked up as Mr. Dawson entered, her eyes red-rimmed but less fearful than the night before. "She's sleeping," she whispered. "The doctors said she's very sick. She has pneumonia and other things." Mr. Dawson sat down beside her, his heart aching for the young girl. "I'm so sorry, Lily," he said. "I'm so sorry you've had to go through all this." Lily nodded, her gaze fixed on her mother. "It's not your fault," she said. "You helped us." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the gentle beeping of the machines monitoring Eleanor's condition. Mr. Dawson, wanting to understand more about their situation, gently encouraged Lily to talk about her past. Hesitantly, haltingly, Lily began to share her story. She spoke of her father, a kind and loving man who had been a construction worker. He had died in a workplace accident 2 years earlier, leaving Lily and Eleanor devastated and financially ruined. They had lost their home, their car, everything. They had tried to stay with relatives, but the arrangements hadn't worked out. They had ended up on the streets, struggling to survive, moving from shelter to shelter, constantly facing the dangers and indignities of homelessness. Eleanor had tried to find work, but her health had been deteriorating rapidly. She had developed a persistent cough, and she was constantly weak and tired. She had tried to shield Lily from the worst of their situation, but it had been impossible. Lily had dropped out of school to help care for her mother. She had begged for money, scavenged for food, and done whatever she could to keep them alive. But it had never been enough. As Lily spoke, Mr. Dawson listened intently, his heart breaking with each detail. He had never imagined the hardships that some people faced, the daily struggles for survival that were hidden from view in his comfortable, routine-driven life. He learned that Lily had been an excellent student before her life had been turned upside down. She had loved to read, to write, to learn. She had dreamed of going to college, of becoming a teacher. The police, having run a background check on Lily, had discovered her school records, confirming her academic achievements. They had found glowing reports from her teachers, praising her intelligence, her creativity, and her determination. It was a stark contrast to the image Mr. Dawson had initially formed of her, the image of a freeloader, a street kid, a problem. He saw now that she was a bright, resilient, and courageous young girl who had been dealt a terrible hand in life. He felt a surge of admiration for her strength, for her unwavering love for her mother. He also felt a renewed sense of determination to help her, to give her a chance to rebuild her life, to pursue her dreams. He realized that he had been given an opportunity, not just to help Lily and her mother, but to learn from them, to grow as a person, to become more compassionate, more understanding, more engaged with the world around him. He was no longer just a store owner, going through the motions of his daily life. He was a part of something bigger, something more meaningful. He was a part of Lily's story, and he was determined to help her write a happy ending. Despite Susan's assurances, the inevitable happened. After Eleanor was stabilized in the hospital, Child Protective Services became involved. While everyone acknowledged that Lily's devotion to her mother was extraordinary, it was deemed unsafe and unsustainable for a 14-year-old to be the primary caregiver for a terminally ill parent on the streets. The separation was agonizing. Lily clung to her mother, sobbing, begging not to be taken away. Eleanor, weak but lucid, tried to reassure her, promising that it was only temporary, that they would be together again soon. Mr. Dawson stood by, feeling helpless and heartbroken, witnessing the raw pain of a mother and daughter being torn apart. Lily was placed in a temporary foster home, a clean and safe environment, but a far cry from the love and familiarity of her mother's presence, even in their dire circumstances. The foster parents, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, were kind but somewhat distant, already caring for several other children. Lily felt lost and alone, her anxiety amplified by the uncertainty of her mother's condition and her own future. Mr. Dawson, feeling a growing responsibility for Lily, visited her at the foster home as often as he was allowed. He brought her small gifts, books, art supplies, and new stuffed rabbit to replace the worn-out Hoppy, but mostly he brought his presence, a steady and reassuring figure in her turbulent world. He listened to her fears, her frustrations, her anger at the system that had separated her from her mother. He didn't offer empty platitudes or false promises. He simply listened, validated her feelings, and assured her that he would do everything he could to help. He also visited Eleanor in the hospital, keeping her updated on Lily's progress and offering her words of comfort and encouragement. Eleanor, weakened by her illness, expressed her gratitude to Mr. Dawson, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Thank you for saving my Lily. Thank you for being there for her when I couldn't." Mr. Dawson was deeply moved by her words. He realized that he had become an unexpected source of hope and support for this struggling family. He had started out as a cynical, self-absorbed store owner, but he had been transformed by his encounter with Lily and her mother. He began to research the resources available to homeless families, the legal rights of foster children, and the process of obtaining guardianship or adoption. He was determined to explore every avenue, to find a way to reunite Lily and her mother, or, if that was not possible, to ensure that Lily had a stable and loving home. He also started to confront his own past, his own biases, his own shortcomings. He realized that he had been living in a bubble, insulated from the realities of poverty and hardship. He had judged people too quickly, dismissed their struggles too easily. He began to see the world through different eyes, with more compassion, more empathy, more understanding. He started to volunteer at a local homeless shelter, offering his time and resources to help others in need. He became an advocate for social justice, speaking out against inequality and poverty. He had been changed by his encounter with Lily and her mother. He had been awakened to the suffering that existed in his own community, and he had been inspired to do something about it. He had found a new purpose in life, a purpose that extended beyond the walls of his convenience store. Mr. Dawson's transformation wasn't just internal, it manifested in concrete actions. He became a tireless advocate for Lily, navigating the complex web of social services and legal procedures with a determination that surprised even himself. He started by attending all of Lily's case conferences and court hearings, often sitting quietly in the back, observing and learning. He quickly realized that the system, while well-intentioned, was often overwhelmed and under-resourced. Lily was just one case among many, and it was easy for her to get lost in the shuffle. He made it his mission to ensure that Lily's voice was heard, that her needs were met, that her rights were protected. He became a persistent presence, a familiar face to the social workers, the lawyers, and the judges involved in her case. He used his business acumen to his advantage, organizing documents, keeping track of deadlines, and researching legal precedents. He learned the language of the system, the jargon and the procedures, and he used that knowledge to advocate effectively for Lily. He also used his personal connections to help Lily. He spoke to Officer Ramirez, leveraging their newfound rapport to gain insights into the investigation and to ensure that Lily's best interests were being considered. He reached out to his customers, his neighbors, his friends, asking for their support, their advice, their expertise. He discovered a surprising wellspring of compassion and generosity within his community. People offered to donate clothes, food, and money. A local lawyer offered to represent Lily pro bono. A retired teacher offered to tutor her, helping her to catch up on her missed schooling. Mr. Dawson also began to challenge his own prejudices and assumptions. He visited the homeless shelter where he had volunteered, not just as a helper, but as a listener. He sat down with the residents, heard their stories, and learned about the diverse and complex reasons why people end up on the streets. He realized that homelessness was not a choice, but a consequence of systemic failures, of poverty, of mental illness, of addiction, of trauma. He saw the humanity in each individual, the struggles they faced, the resilience they demonstrated. He became a vocal advocate for affordable housing, for increased funding for social services, for a more compassionate and just society. He wrote letters to the editor, attended city council meetings, and spoke out against the stigma and discrimination faced by homeless people. He also made a personal commitment to Lily. He promised her that he would not abandon her, that he would be there for her, no matter what. He promised her that he would fight for her, that he would help her find a stable and loving home. He knew that he couldn't replace her mother, but he could offer her his support, his guidance, his friendship. He could be a positive influence in her life, a role model, a mentor. He started to think about the possibility of becoming Lily's legal guardian, or even adopting her. He knew it would be a huge commitment, a life-changing decision. But he also knew that he was ready for it. He had found a new purpose in life, a purpose that gave him meaning and fulfillment. He had found a daughter in Lily, and he was determined to give her the best possible future. The process of securing a stable future for Lily was fraught with bureaucratic hurdles and frustrating delays. The social services system, while designed to protect vulnerable children, often seemed to work against their best interests. Lily's case was complex. Her mother's terminal illness, their homelessness, and the previous involvement of Child Protective Services due to the abusive environment created by Victor in the previous story created a tangled web of legal and logistical challenges. The initial plan was to find a suitable foster family for Lily, while simultaneously exploring the possibility of reuniting her with her mother, if and when Eleanor's health improved. However, finding a foster family willing to take on a traumatized teenager with a terminally ill mother proved difficult. Mr. Dawson, increasingly frustrated with the slow pace of the system, began to explore the possibility of becoming Lily's legal guardian himself. He knew it was a long shot. He was a single, older man with no prior experience in parenting. He was a former cynic who now found his life turned upside down. He consulted with the lawyer who had offered to represent Lily pro bono. The lawyer, Ms. Alvarez, was initially skeptical. She explained the rigorous screening process, the home visits, the background checks, the financial requirements. She cautioned him that the court would prioritize finding a family placement for Lily, preferably with relatives. "It's not impossible, Mr. Dawson," Ms. Alvarez said, "but it will be an uphill battle. You need to be prepared for a long and difficult process." Mr. Dawson was undeterred. He was determined to fight for Lily, to give her the stability and security she deserved. He began the arduous process of applying for guardianship, filling out mountains of paperwork, attending parenting classes, and undergoing a series of intrusive home visits. The social workers were impressed by Mr. Dawson's commitment and his genuine affection for Lily. They saw the positive impact he had on her life, the way she looked up to him, the way she trusted him. But they also had concerns. They questioned his ability to handle a traumatized teenager, his lack of experience with parenting, his age. Lily, meanwhile, was struggling to adjust to her new life. She was grateful for the safety and stability of the foster home, but she missed her mother terribly. She worried about her constantly, and she felt guilty for not being able to be with her. She also struggled with the emotional scars of her past. She had nightmares, flashbacks, and panic attacks. She found it difficult to trust adults, to form relationships, to believe that she deserved to be happy. Mr. Dawson was a constant source of support, visiting her regularly, taking her on outings, and simply being there for her when she needed him. He listened to her fears, her anxieties, her frustrations. He encouraged her to continue her therapy, to focus on her studies, to believe in herself. He also kept her informed about the legal proceedings, explaining the complexities of the system in a way that she could understand. He made sure that she knew her rights, that she had a voice, that she was not alone. The system, with all its limitations and frustrations, was slowly working. But it was Mr. Dawson's unwavering commitment, his personal dedication, that made the biggest difference in Lily's life. He was the anchor in her storm, the one constant she could rely on. And he was determined to see her through, to help her find a safe and loving home, to give her a chance at a brighter future. After months of legal wrangling, emotional turmoil, and bureaucratic hurdles, the day finally arrived. Mr. Dawson, Lily, Ms. Alvarez, and Susan Miller, the social worker, gathered in a small, somber courtroom. The judge, a kind-faced woman with a reputation for fairness, reviewed the case file, listened to the arguments, and considered the evidence. Ms. Alvarez presented a compelling case for Mr. Dawson's guardianship, highlighting his unwavering commitment to Lily, his stable home environment, his financial security, and the strong bond they had formed. She emphasized Lily's wishes to live with Mr. Dawson, and she presented letters of support from Officer Ramirez, Sarah Lily's former classmate, and several members of the community. The social worker, while initially hesitant, ultimately recommended that Mr. Dawson be granted guardianship, acknowledging his extraordinary dedication and the positive impact he had had on Lily's life. Eleanor, Lily's mother, was too old to attend the hearing, but she had sent a letter expressing her full support for Mr. Dawson and her heartfelt gratitude for his kindness and compassion. The judge, after careful consideration, made her decision. She granted Mr. Dawson temporary legal guardianship of Lily, with a review scheduled in 6 months to assess the situation and potentially make the guardianship permanent. Lily, hearing the judge's words, burst into tears of joy. She ran to Mr. Dawson and hugged him tightly, her small body shaking with relief. Mr. Dawson, his own eyes welling up, held her close, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. It was a victory, a hard-fought victory, but it was also just the beginning. Mr. Dawson knew that the road ahead would still be challenging, that Lily would continue to need support and therapy to heal from her trauma. But he was ready. He was committed. He was, for all intents and purposes, her father now. Lily moved into Mr. Dawson's apartment, a small but comfortable space that he had carefully prepared for her arrival. He had converted his spare room into a bedroom for her, decorating it with bright colors, posters of her favorite bands, and a bookshelf filled with books he had carefully chosen. The transition was not always easy. Lily struggled with nightmares, anxiety, and moments of intense sadness. She missed her mother terribly, and she worried about her constantly. But Mr. Dawson was there for her, every step of the way. He listened to her fears, comforted her during her nightmares, and encouraged her to express her emotions. He also helped her to re-enroll in school. Lily, despite missing several months of classes, was determined to catch up. She studied diligently, working with tutors and teachers, and she quickly regained her academic standing. She rediscovered her love of learning, her passion for reading, and her dream of becoming a teacher. Mr. Dawson, inspired by Lily's resilience and determination, continued to advocate for homeless families and children. He became a vocal supporter of local charities and organizations, and he used his story to raise awareness about the challenges faced by those living on the streets. He also remained in close contact with Eleanor, visiting her regularly at the hospital and keeping her updated on Lily's progress. He developed a deep respect for Eleanor, recognizing her strength and her unwavering love for her daughter, despite her own dire circumstances. Sadly, Eleanor's health continued to decline. A few months after Lily moved in with Mr. Dawson, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep, with Lily by her side. It was a devastating loss for Lily, but she found comfort in Mr. Dawson's unwavering support and in the knowledge that her mother was no longer suffering. After Eleanor's passing, and with her full blessing given prior, Mr. Dawson petitioned the court for full, permanent adoption. The process was smoother this time, the evidence of their strong bond and Mr. Dawson's commitment overwhelming. The adoption was finalized, and Lily officially became Lily Dawson. Lily, finally, had a home, a family, a future. She had been rescued from the streets, from a life of hardship and uncertainty. She had found a father in the most unexpected of places, in the heart of a cynical old store owner who had been transformed by her courage and her resilience. Mr. Dawson, in turn, had found a daughter, a purpose, a renewed sense of meaning in his life. He had discovered the power of compassion, the transformative potential of kindness, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. He was no longer just a store owner, he was a father, a protector, a champion for the vulnerable. Years passed. Lily blossomed into a confident, compassionate, and determined young woman. She graduated high school with honors, attended college on a scholarship, and fulfilled her dream of becoming a teacher. She dedicated her career to helping underprivileged children, inspired by her own experiences and by Mr. Dawson's unwavering support. Mr. Dawson, now retired from his store, remained actively involved in Lily's life. He was her biggest cheerleader, her confidant, her rock. He watched with pride as she achieved her goals, as she made a difference in the world, as she became the person she was always meant to be. He often reflected on the events that had brought them together, on that cold night in Detroit when a frightened, homeless girl had walked into his store and changed his life forever. He realized that he had been given a second chance, a chance to redeem himself, a chance to become a better person. He had learned the importance of empathy, of compassion, of looking beyond the surface and seeing the humanity in everyone. He had learned that even the smallest act of kindness can have a profound impact on someone's life. He had also learned about the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to overcome adversity, to heal from trauma, to find hope in the darkest of times. He had seen it in Lily, in her unwavering determination to rebuild her life, to pursue her dreams, to help others. Lily, in turn, never forgot the kindness that Mr. Dawson had shown her. She knew that he had saved her life, that he had given her a future. She was eternally grateful for his love, his support, his unwavering belief in her. She often spoke publicly about her experiences, raising awareness about homelessness, child abuse, and the importance of compassion and understanding. She became a role model for other young people, a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of resilience. The story of Lily and Mr. Dawson became a local legend, a reminder that even in the most ordinary of lives, extraordinary things can happen. It was a story of redemption, of transformation, of the unexpected bonds that can connect us and change us forever. It was a story that proved that even a cold, cynical heart could be warmed by the simple act of offering a hand to someone in need. It shows kindness can change the world.